Good morning, everybody. Welcome to CNU-CTX 2020 Forum, Reimagining Community, Catalyst for Change in Central Texas. As you know, this time of year, we typically have our annual luncheon, which has become a very popular and enjoyable experience for us, to be able to sit with all of you and provide some good programming information. Of course, with COVID-19, we're not able to do that this year. So we thought we would come up with an alternative, which is our online forum. We'd much rather be with you in person, but we do see that there's some potential advantages to this format. One is that we're able to bring you a lot more programming. We have an entire day worth of topics that are relevant to Central Texas. And we're able to bring in more diverse voices from all across the country to address those topics. And of course, our very special keynote speaker is coming, well, at least virtually, from further afar than anyone we've ever had before. So we're very excited about that. I'm gonna go back and bear with me 1 second. We do want to thank our sponsors that make it possible. And I will bring that up in a second. So we are very fortunate to have two strategic sponsors, Reconnect Austin and the University of Texas School of Architecture Urban Design Program. This strategic partnership is made possible by a generous endowment provided by Professor Emeritus Sinclair Black, who's also CNU-CTX board member emeritus and Austin's Athena Medal winner. The Athena Medal was given by the Congress for the New Urbanism in recognition of pioneering efforts of the new urbanism. We're very proud of Sinclair and thankful for his contribution to our community. We also have a leading sponsor in McCann Adams Studio, so thank you, Jan and Jim. We have 4 supporting sponsors, the Austin Board of Realtors, Look, Think, Make, Perry Lorenz, and Lifeline. And then we have 2 friends, Code Studio and Dunaway. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Congress for the New Urbanism Central Texas, I really want to have special thanks to our Executive Director, Mateo Barnstone, and also in helping us with the technical side, Priya Patel. I think I forgot to introduce myself, so I will do that. I am Greg Kylo, president of CNU-CTX, and I will be your MC for today. Before we get on to the first panel, Mateo wants a special request of all of you, and that is, do not use the chat function for your questions. If you have questions for the panelists, please enter them into the question and answer button, and they will go to the moderator, and the moderator can then select them for the panelists to answer. I will now introduce our moderator of our first panel. The panel is Transforming Highways to Boulevards Across Texas. It is moderated by CNU-CTX board member Veronica Castro de Barrera, who is the founding principal of VC2B Architecture and Art, a small consulting practice in Austin, Texas. She's a licensed architect, intensely curious about walkable cities, placemaking, and inclusive urban design that create complete communities. In her 23-year career, she has designed a diverse portfolio of civic projects, including housing, recreational, and mass transit. The majority of her work has been focused on the architecture of mobility in an effort to humanize the built environment, connecting the most vulnerable in our communities to opportunities. She has studied in Mexico, United States, Italy, and most recently Denmark with Gale Architects. Veronica has led the transit studio for a national design build firm I worked alongside teams of engineers and artists in successful design, documentation, and construction administration of transit programs and active mobility investments for Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, and St. Louis, Missouri. Veronica finds enormous joy and inspiration sharing meals and conversations around the kitchen table and sketching livable cities from the magic of sidewalk cafes. Veronica, you're up.
Thank you so much, Greg, and welcome everybody as we kick off our forum for the Congress for New Urbanism. It is my intense privilege and honor to present to you a very diverse group of advocates, of leaders, of wonderful community visionaries who are shaping the built environment in the benefit of all people. I think you will be thoroughly impressed with their presentations, the care they've taken to help influence our communities around the United States. So as we gather this morning from each of our living rooms, offices at home, different neighborhoods in the same city in Central Texas, in Austin, we are able to gather today from Dallas, from El Paso, and from other cities around the United States, in Asheville, North Carolina, as well as far and wide in other parts of the United States. And hopefully you can share this presentation around to other friends that you have made in your travels around the world. I think this is something that has influenced all of us because, as you know, when we live in the United States, we have the responsibility to, as we shape our built environment, to influence what other countries and cities do, and as they look up to us. But there's so much we learn from other countries as well. So we want this to be a cross-pollination of ideas, an inspiring forum for you to reach out, connect with this panelist. And I don't want to start with a sad note, but I do think that it's important that we recognize that we are in a very unique situation with this pandemic, and that a lot of people have lost loved ones. So we want to extend our sympathies and really share a moment to recognize the lives that we have lost and how we're brought together today in this forum. And with that, I'd like to introduce the panel. And as we go through, I'll be saying their name again so you know who's next. But today we have Luisito Negron. He's the district director for the Office of State Senator Jose Rodriguez from El Paso. He's the president of the Sunset Heights Neighborhood Improvement Association. We also have Joe Minicozy. He's an urban planner, founding principal of Urban 3. And you're gonna see his wonderful presentation in helping us understand the importance of fiscal resilience in a very creative way. Jay Blasek Crossley. He's the executive director of Farm and City, a nonprofit organization based here in Austin. He serves on diverse boards, advancing pedestrian safety and equity in mobility. Patrick Kennedy, he's the co-founder of Space Between Design Studio. He's a planner, an urban designer, and currently serving on the board of the Dallas Area Rapid Transit. We have Hayden Black Walker. She's a director of planning for Black and Vernoy Architecture and Urbanism. Together with her father, Sinclair Black, they have founded Reconnect Austin. And we have Christoph Spieler. He's the vice president and director of planning for Hewitt Sollers. It's a full service design firm, and he recently published his book, Trains, Buses, People, an opinionated atlas of US transit. And if you're like me, a truly just a transit enthusiast, I think you will find that a delightful read. So with that, I'd like to open the floor and welcome Joe, and the screen is yours.
Thank you. Let's see, make sure I can get this. And y'all can see my screen, right?
Yes. Well, no, not yet. I can
Not yet.
see.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name's Joe Minicozy. Great to see you all again virtually. I've actually been through Austin, and doing several presentations with your chapter. Some of this work I'm going to go through, you've seen before. A lot of this is maybe more of a backstory about the why and the NEPA Act. And this is something that basically the federal government passed in 1969 because DOTs were running amok in cities and causing problems, and they knew it. So they created laws that actually protect us. So as urban designers, think of the NEPA Act as essentially a form-based code for federal dollars. So if you spend money in your community, we actually have rights that we could use against our DOTs because they don't follow these principles. So when they do stuff like drop a highway into a community, this is Asheville's. Here's our downtown off in the distance, and basically right now I-26 is off the lower right here. And to come through I-26, you basically do this move. They dropped a federal highway onto a local road. Unbelievably stupid. And this is even when we had the NEPA Act. So that was in place when our community did this. And we've been since 1980 trying to basically do this connection. Our group of architects, landscape architects, urban designers, planners, real estate professionals, and even attorneys. And I learned about the NEPA Act through DJ Gherkin, who is a local attorney and also a planner. We were active because we got involved in the NEPA process. So we started a nonprofit design center in Bill's office. This is Bill on the right here, Bill Langdon. He's super awesome. This is Jackie Schauer, who was our AIA president at the time. And we wrote a grant and opened an office. This is our mayor cutting the ribbon. And we built a model, and we basically took on redesigning the highway. Not an easy project, but we put a counter offer out there. So we have a right to all reasonable alternatives in our community. So here's the river right here. And they basically dropped in all of the spaghetti. These drawings are really hard to read, so we had to make it simple for people. So we basically fine-tuned them into telling people, like, here's all the spaghetti, here's our redesign proposal. We're squeezing all the spaghetti together, and we're looking at ways to amend other parts of the community, even a little local bridge down here. But really what we're trying to do is kind of, once this connection is in, is stitch back together this real estate is an option. So basically mend the scar that's been built in our community, and that's community design. So we drew pictures. This is all real estate that's currently non-taxable, and here's the current spaghetti now, and here it is now. And this, we're not saying don't do the highway, we're just saying, do it better. And you can fill some buildings in here in this space that's currently non-taxable, and you could take this garbage and make it walkable. Now, as the designers are doing this is some little bit of pre-urban 3 work. I was running the numbers as the architects were doing drawings, measuring the retail office and whatever, and basically running the numbers on the valuation, because this is an economic impact. If we can have this in our community, that's about $700 million worth of development, which yields about $111 million worth of taxes. So as we're presenting to our community, we're presenting, this is what it means to us financially. So you can see all the pretty drawings. It's going to increase walkability, it's going to increase transit, it's going to increase affordability for housing, artist incubation space, whatever you want. But what it means to us financially is if we don't do this, we lose $111 million. That should be in the environmental impact statement. They are required to do that. So we're basically doing the DOT's work for them as a check. Now, I'm not going to say that they were great to work with. This is their design in 2004-ish. This is our redesign. And as they took our design, so our design is actually in the process, they basically started screwing it up. And over the next 10 years or so, they basically bastardized it back to what they initially did. So here's our design alternative: make it simple, make it short. And then you can see how much they've widened it back up in the intervening years. And this is the way they operate, because they have a culture in how they operate. They're going to operate to their best advantage. So they want to move the cars as fast as possible, take up as much land as possible, but we have laws that protect that. So use those laws to your advantage. And again, it's not easy. This is not an easy fight, but you have these things to verify. So here's how they've kind of widened it up in one of those sections. Now, this is public housing. You can see what we do to public housing in Asheville. Let's go ahead and just put all these people around a moat of highway. So we're trying to undo all of that, but we're still fighting with them to tighten this up in here so that we can have that land. And we're always going back to, this is a financial impact for our community to do that. So they just don't get the design. And the other thing you have to do is you have to show people. This is the design of the bridge that we recommended, which is a double-decker bridge. It exists. This is one in Portland. They actually build bike racks to look like the bridge. And I show people, and this scares the hell out of them. I'm like, this is the design they're offering. Does that look even close to the design and vision that we have? If you don't hold them accountable, if you don't follow through, this is not an easy task to go undertake in your communities, and you all know this. You have to hold them accountable. And let's go back to Jane. Traffic engineering is a bogus profession. It's a pseudoscience masquerading in its knowledge. I'll agree with that. This has been going on so long. I just decided, let's just go ahead and double check their math. So if we can look at the weather forecaster, we're getting all of these forecasts. Why don't we ever go back and double check the weather forecaster to see how accurate they are? So we grabbed their original projection from 1980, which was basically they projected, I think, 54,000 trips. And this is what they said from 1980. The future in 1995 is going to be this, and this is if you straight line it. Well, we actually have actual trips, so we plotted that. These are the actuals. And then in 95, they made another projection. They got a little bit more reasonable. Traffic actually followed that. And then for some reason in 2000 in 99, they got really crazy and they said the future in 2025 is going to be this. You know, all this information exists. Here's the actuals. They dropped their projection down. And then for some reason in 2010, they got nutty again and put it up to 122,000. And here's what actually happened. So I had a summer intern that I said, Mari, let's just go ahead and take the last 12 years and project it forward and what will happen. To my surprise, you can go back and look at the data. So in 2017, it was this, and last year it was this. So we actually got closer with 5th grade math than they got with their sophisticated models. I showed this to local people. I'm like, do you trust them? I mean, this is the crap they use to do their projections. That's their information right there on the slide. Why do we take this as some sort of hand of God? So, you know, we'd be better off with North Carolina's mystic healer and psychic Gary Spivey working at NCDOT. Maybe he does. Maybe he's the one doing the models. I don't know. But when you look at their economics, it's even worse. Now, again, this is straight out of the NEPA section. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but you have right here. It says you shall discuss the relationship between the analysis and even unquantifiable stuff, like aesthetically, how does it impact you? They typically put in bogus statements or softball statements that aren't even close or accurate because they don't have the proper professionals doing this analysis. And it's up to us to catch them in the document. So here's their entire economic analysis in their document, this whole one page, where they list about 1% of the value of Asheville. Well, I can do the math on that. 1% of Asheville is $14 billion of value. 1% is 140 million. So that means it's about $84 million loss of taxes. Now, to show you how bogus this was, I don't know if you remember my last number, it was 700 million, a little bit more than 140. But just going into the area and saying, okay, well, I've got this building that was built right there on that parcel. That's about 11 million an acre. And I just rubber stamped a bunch in. That's 175 million an acre. So that's more than 140. Or look at the math that we gave you in 2007. That's 700 million right there. So both 700 and, you know, it's probably about $1 billion now. So $1 billion and 175 million is way more than 140. So do the math on this stuff. So what does that mean? Well, that means that our community is going to lose about $516 million of taxes over 50 years. So why don't you tell us that? Why don't you have that in your economic statement rather than the 1%? Why don't you just tell us that it's a $500 million economic impact? And the reason why they didn't tell us that is because the professional, I'll use that term lightly, that did the economic analysis assumed that maybe it'd be a gas station, a strip mall, and like a motel in this area. Like we even drew the drawings, but you have to hold them accountable to this. So what they'll do is they'll put that document out, and the document is like yay thick, and they'll put a statement in it. It may be erroneous, but it's still a statement. It's up to us to say that that's wrong. And we all know what they're doing. They're basically, you know, we've seen Jeff Tumlin do these models where, you know, this is how the highways are used, and everybody fights about that one peak bubble where you're a little bit over capacity, where you get a level of service of F for a couple hours out of the day. Now for Austin, it's probably longer for you guys. But what we see is urbanists is this isn't a failure. This is the waste of real estate all around it, or the induced demand. So, okay, we're spending $516 million of local tax dollars to save 2 minutes of travel time. So know your NEPA. I'm just going to close with this. It says right in there that you have to have an interdisciplinary team of people that have expertise in the environmental design arts and planning and decision making. Well, who are the design arts people? That would be called landscape architects, urban designers. When you look at the makeup of the team that they have, notice the heavily skewed engineers. They've got 39 engineers on the team. And then I guess the labor relations person is going to be the person doing the design, right? So they have nobody with design arts expertise. The planner, the one planner that's involved in this project has a bachelor's in science and planning. It's like, okay, he doesn't even have a design degree. It says, understand the induced demand. These are part of the effects. They have to measure this. So if you widen the highway in Austin, it will induce demand into the future, into the further landscape. Work with your university, run the numbers, hand them to them, say, hey, DOT, you missed the VMT counts of what's going to happen when we add more lanes, because it's going to disperse the traffic into the ether. It's going to cause more carbon. Run the numbers and give it to them. So you deserve to have this competent information and demand it. So hold the DOT accountable to the laws that were basically written because of the way that they operate. They haven't changed their culture since the 1950s. They're not going to change their culture. Don't expect them to change their culture. Do the math for them. Use the law to your advantage because it's given to you to protect you. And my favorite part of all the information that I've found is this is actually straight out of the DOT's training guide for doing an EIS document, that even an idiot on the spot is worth more than a genius a thousand miles away. So you all are on the spot. It's your community. You have laws to protect you, and just use them to your advantage. And that's my show. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Joe. Next, we're going to have Jay Blazek Crossley. And while you swap screens, I want to invite Jay to join us and start sharing his screen. There you go. The screen is yours.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. And I wanted to start with looking at, the I-35 freeway project that we're talking about in Central Austin. Over the last 10 years, 71 people have died getting to work or taking their kid to school. And I've been, one of the ones trying to say, we can work with TxDOT and let's be reasonable and let's get good ideas in this process. I finally read their draft Purpose and Need the other day, and it filled me with rage. And there was no mention of the people who have died on this freeway. There was mention of increasing safety. And then a lot of the examples of what that meant was insufficient bridge heights for large trucks. So this must be the primary purpose of this kind of investment, is to end traffic deaths and to make a safe, accessible system for all. And a key point about I-35 is the largest group of people dying are pedestrians in the main lanes of the freeway. And that is the argument for Reconnect Austin, and that we, having a freeway like this dividing a dense urban place, does not work. But then also the other people that die are people in cars driving on the feeders and in the main lanes. And so I'm pushing, along with a bunch of others, I think there's really 4 points of leverage we have now on I-35. First is that ending traffic deaths must be the top priority. Next, I think there's a fairly strong contingent that could fight for not adding any non-managed lanes to this project. And I'll show you later what that can mean. And that we need to reconnect Austin as much as we can. And finally, that TxDOT and the city and the county and the MPO all must be thinking about inclusive, equitable growth strategy as they do this kind of freeway building. So real quickly, Texas isn't what a lot of people think. 25% of this is a cartogram where every Texan is equal. And a fourth of Texans live in the Houston region, a fourth live in DFW, and another fourth in Austin, San Antonio, Rio Grande Valley, and El Paso. And Houston, the majority of our growth will be in Houston and Dallas, and then much of the rest of it will be in those other major metros. But most of us think of Texas as this rural state, and a lot of our political power is rural, even though the largest chunk of Texans are urban. And if we zoom into this map, just one point about Austin is the most sprawled metro region in Texas. on a percent basis. And the Houston is actually the home to the greatest amount of dense urbanism in Texas. And I think it's important that Austinites try to understand what that's about. And a key to all this is, are we going to keep driving so much? Texans drive more than basically than anyone in the country. But there are reasons to believe that Texans are driving less. And if you look at the very dense urban places like Dallas County and Harris County, vehicle miles traveled has been going down, and not just vehicle miles traveled per capita, but total. But there's some problems with the TxDOT data. But we could imagine reasonably that Texas will reach peak VMT sometime soon. And so why would we be planning on expanding freeways? And a key point is that we have radically moved from a user fee system to a not user fee system. And so we are heavily subsidizing roads and things. And but we're not really using these major urban freeways more. If you look at the major urban freeways in Austin, traffic counts have essentially stayed the same for the last 20 years. And in Houston, on I-45, $8 billion project to widen the freeway, none of these points along that freeway have seen more traffic except for the one the furthest out. And generally there's been a slight decline in the amount of use on these freeways. So why do we have this story that we have like worsening traffic? And it all comes down, in my mind, to the regional growth forecasts from our metropolitan planning organizations, which I've recently learned you can characterize as colonizing the future. And so this is the Austin region divided between rural, suburban. Rural's yellow, suburban's orange, and then urban is darker orange and brown. And 3/4 of Austinites live in rural and suburban settings, and only about a fourth live in walkable urban places, even though there are indications that about half of the residents of Texas metro regions wish that they could live in walkable urban places. And this is the official Campo growth forecast. And just really quick jump in between, this represents massive loss of land, hundreds of square miles of land loss. And the official plan is that we will keep with this inadequate mismatch of supply and demand, where 3/4 of people will have to live in suburban and rural places, and only a fourth get to live in walkable urban places. And this is the model that TxDOT uses to tell us that we're going to be stuck in traffic forever. And so we developed an alternative model that says, what if we meet the demand and half of people get their walkable urban places? It turns out it makes a big difference. And one key point is the Texas demographer and our Texas MPOs have been getting it wrong. And they've systematically underestimated the growth in urban counties and overestimated growth in suburban counties. And the point is, it makes a big difference. Reuven Brooks, a colleague of mine, reran the Project Connect stops models and found that if you use our sustainable equitable growth forecast, you would probably get about 60,000 more people using transit every day. And if you had a actual like dense transit oriented growth forecast, you would double the amount of people allowed to use transit in Austin. And so it all comes down to this freeway, and I've just been playing with, currently I-35 is between 10 and 14 lanes in the area we're talking about. And then here's the TxDOT proposal to go to 20 lanes, which is terrifying. And so we need to meaningfully entertain an alternative. And the ideal scenario, if we are going to have a freeway, would be to upgrade 2 lanes in each direction to managed lanes, and then have 2 lanes in each direction of free lanes, and then have safe feeder roads. But that's probably not going to happen. So perhaps there could be a compromise where we essentially maintain about the same amount of free lanes going through of 3 lanes, but make it consistent throughout. And a key point is we have to hold TxDOT to the proposal they've already said of tunneling the managed lanes, burying the freeway lanes, and having surface lanes. But we could do that with these better proposals. and even if we do this compromise, TxDOT says they have the money for that massive freeway. Well, they could also do this one and then save that green space. And so I think as we go through this environmental process, we have to meaningfully entertain different growth scenarios and meaningfully entertain the idea that we'll keep sprawling forever, but also entertain the idea that we will grow equitable transit-oriented development. We also need to change our assumptions about how Texans will travel, which we've seen very much a lot of this year. And then finally, we need to entertain meaningful different investment packages, and not just different arrangements of the same investment package, which is the current proposal from TxDOT. And we need to consider all of these together. And we have the computing power these days to do a crazy matrix, to look at all the costs and benefits of all these different scenarios. And then the people can really understand what is being proposed and what we should do. And finally, we need a lot better metrics. And we should not be trying to move people. We should be trying to give people access, and we should use measures that actually say, are people equitably having access to transit, access to safe driving, access to safe walking and biking. And I think we can do that. And so we need to work with TxDOT to do a better process. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jay. Next, we have Patrick Kennedy.
Yes, hello, everybody. Hopefully my slideshow is coming up and you can all yell at me if it is not and you can see it. I'm coming to you from Dallas, Texas, and I'm not fighting a highway widening at the moment. We're actually promoting a highway removal, and that is IH 345 in downtown Dallas, the one we're looking at right now in the slideshow. The story is really sort of the story of my life in Dallas since I moved here after graduating from school. And I was looking for a place to live where I could walk to work in downtown. And this was my walk to work because there weren't many places to live in downtown back then. And I would walk under this highway every single day. And this was my crash course in the impacts and the negative impacts on real estate that highways, and particularly elevated highways, have on real estate. This was a major American city, and I was walking past vacant land, empty surface parking lots, empty buildings on my way to work. And it was almost the entirety of my walk. And it made me realize this could be something else. And so I'm basically going to walk through 10 years in about 6 minutes here to go through it. And at the time, I was following along the various highway removals that were happening around the country and around the world, like in Seoul with the Cheonggyecheon, and in San Francisco with the Embarcadero and Central Artery, and Milwaukee with the Park East freeways. And this is what all of those structures looked like previously, and this is what they all look like now. And we've assembled plenty of research that we've put on the website, anewdallas.com, of the before and after and the impacts on traffic and economic development and the environment, and particularly things like affordable housing too, because that's been a key strategy in a lot of these efforts as well. And then by 2010, the city of Dallas came out with a downtown master plan that said the inner highway loop is a problem, but there is nothing that we can do about it. And that was really sort of the trigger for me to say, why are we self-editing it ourselves and accepting that it is a problem and not thinking about what does the city need to be in 2050 and how do we get there? And that's what we decided to do. And so I felt there was a need to better understand this impact of highways on real estate and what it was doing to downtown Dallas. And this is a map of underdeveloped property, so in red, which is largely vacant land and surface parking lots, unproductive land not performing for the tax base, and tax exempt properties in orange. So things like convention centers and arts districts and things like that are easy to add when the land is very cheap, but while they're benefits to the community in some cases, they're not really adding much in terms of productive real estate. And the fact that the land is so cheap next to downtown is fundamentally a problem. And then when we look at what office is in downtown, most of that commercial real estate is vacant. So we see about half of the downtown office buildings and high rises are empty. Compare that to Uptown, which has since backfilled and has significant development and population growth, but that hasn't occurred in downtown like it has in Uptown. And that sort of gets to the ironic tragedy of Dallas, that from the 50s to the 80s, we were building all of these office high rises. We haven't built a single office high rise in downtown since, but we were also adding these freeways, which effectively stripped the demand for the real estate while we were adding the most supply. And it just exported all of that growth outwards to the city. And I've since found that job growth has actually been flat since we started building these highways since about 1960. And so we looked around at the various highways and said, okay, well, what if we did do something about it? And there were already plans for the other three sides. So Clyde Warren Park was under construction. There were plans for 35, plans for 30, and there was no conversation about 345 on the east side between downtown and Deep Ellum. So we said, okay, well, hypothetically, what if we just removed the thing? What could it be otherwise? And we drew a boundary around the right of way for the highway, as well as all of that underdeveloped property, and found that it impacted 245 acres that we could turn into something, anything else, and decided to do an analysis of what is that real estate now. It's worth about 3.5 billion or 3.5 million in terms of annual tax revenue to the city, which is virtually nothing. And what we found, if we replaced all of that with new parks as the centerpieces of neighborhood redevelopment, restitched the East Dallas to downtown, that could be worth as much as $4 billion in private investment and 110 million annually in new property tax revenue, just from rebuilding that. But we were not considering how do we move cars through that corridor. We were just saying, we don't really care. We want this to be the center of town. You come to here, not through here. But the number one question that we got was, okay, well, what about the traffic? So that was an answer that we had to address. And we found that the traffic at the time was about 140,000 per day on a capacity of about 145,000. It's now about 160,000. So it's routinely congested for up to 6 hours a day, pre-COVID, of course, and said, okay, well, what if we rerouted the trucks around town? We don't want trucks coming through here causing more congestion and pollution and less safety, and reroute them around town, because it's actually faster to take the Beltway around town than to go through the center of town. So let's take that out of the equation. And since the highway actually snakes through here and disconnects much of the local grid, we found that there is significant capacity in the local grid that's not being used. So these are empty streets that don't even have enough traffic to attract retailers. So this is sort of the fundamental problem, that we've got empty streets that are not functioning well as city streets, and we've got highways that are congested that are not functioning because they can't scale with demand when we need them the most. And so we proposed, instead of streets like this next to downtown, let's have streets like this, and let's restitch the neighborhood by removing the highway and add 27,000 new residents to downtown and 22,000 new jobs. And so TxDOT eventually did come around and say, hey, this thing's falling down. It's 40 years old. We need to replace it. And they showed up with 9 different ways of rebuilding it. And we said, okay, you want the public input process after you have 9 different ways to rebuild it and keep it standing. Why not have the public input process up front? And why are you not thinking about, you're only thinking about traffic and keeping the thing standing, theoretically for safety measures, but we're not talking about the economic impact of it. And so the Texas Transportation Commissioner at the time, Victor Vandergriff, reached out to me and said, you know what, you're right. We should actually have an inclusive process that is holistic and looks at the environmental impact and the economic impact of our transportation dollars. And that led to TxDOT's city map study. And that's what I'm going to talk to a little bit. And this finished in 2016. It was actually a pretty remarkable document that did put the public input up front. And you'll notice that the public input came back and said, you know what, regional mobility is not that important to us. We are much more interested in quality of life and neighborhood character, community and urban street connections, economic development, and parks and open space, all things that I would agree that are far more important than trying to move cars as far and as fast as possible. So we see the public tide starting to change. And then when their document came out, in the summary, it basically said everything that we said would happen, that the removal option that they included in this study of 345 showed that the travel delay would be negligible compared to putting a trenched highway through there, and both of them would be better than doing nothing, and that the removal option would be significantly improved in terms of economic development, job growth, tax growth, all that. But what we found was that they were too focused on commercial development where the need is housing. And they also said, well, this is going to take 24 years to do anything. And we found that that was a problem as well. And so since that was finished in 2016 and passed by the Texas Transportation Commission, Dallas passed a comprehensive housing policy that said, hey, we need 20,000 units that the market is not currently delivering. And it's still not. And so we had to find ways to do that. And to me, I think removing a highway and creating land that the market can actually price to deliver housing where it needs to be near jobs and near transit is a pretty significant step towards that goal. And this year, the city passed its first comprehensive environmental and climate action plan, where it said we need to reduce the amount of single occupancy vehicle trips from 88% to 62%. And we're certainly not going to do that by modeling any kind of growth in traffic that encourages more outward development and sprawl. And so the local stakeholders and property owners and a group that I'm involved with, Coalition for a New Dallas, organized and said, you know what, we actually think we can expedite this. You're planning I-30, DART is planning D2. Let's move all of these forward because they all interconnect. We should plan them all at the same time. So we brought in Tool Design Group, and they said, well, if less than half of the traffic is actually passing through and not coming to the local area, you don't actually need 8 lanes. So what if we improved upon a large trench, made it a small trench, and had that as one option, or completely reconnect the grid with multiple urban boulevards? And so we've been moving forward with that effort, in that we've been successful at then getting TxDOT to push this into a feasibility study where they're looking at the small trench as well as a large trench and our complete removal surface boulevard option. And that is key to then get this into the transportation improvement program. And we're now looking at this being a 7-year effort rather than a 24-year effort. So this is moving forward. They're a little bit slowed down by COVID at the moment, so they can't have public meetings. They want to have actually in-person public meetings, so they're expecting that to happen in 2021. While at the meantime, I'm looking at Tool's conceptual plans, putting those into drawings where we can actually come up with some takeoffs. How much land are we creating in these 2 options that we're repositioning from underdeveloped land? How much are we creating out of right-of-way? And then we can start looking at, well, you know, the trench, while it's smaller, it still has a negative impact on the surrounding real estate. To create deck parks, to create air rights development that still requires a lot of cost and mitigation. Meanwhile, the all-surface option is going to have much more value on the real estate around that as well. So we're looking at those things right now and trying to prioritize those things that are priorities to the city. Like how do we leverage this land into the mixed income housing that we need in downtown and Deep Ellum? How do we leverage this value to help revitalize the areas of the Cedars and also create a fund to help with neighborhood stabilization in South Dallas, which is an area that has seen significant population reduction of about 80% in the last 40 years. So this is where we stand currently. We're expecting this to go to some kind of preferred plan in the next year or so. That was going to require some council action, but that's where we're at. And this is where you can reach me. And perhaps more importantly, at the bottom is the address where the CNU included an interview with me and Peter Park, who was the planner who led the Milwaukee removal on their Great Ideas Freeways Without Futures series. And I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Wonderful presentation. And next we have Cito. And you can transfer over to your screen, Cito.
All right, well, this just took me a second here, but let's see. Okay, so am I on?
Yes, we can see you.
Excellent, okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for letting me join in here. An amazing group of planners and thinkers, and I'm a layperson. I came at this, though, very similar to what Patrick just mentioned. It started with my personal experience here in the neighborhood and just a general interest of seeing things. So I'm gonna provide kind of a conceptual overview of El Paso, what it is, and what's happening here. This is a picture from a painting showing El Paso in 1853. And the defining characteristics of El Paso are the mountain and the river. And the river valley created kind of an oasis in the desert, a very beautiful spot. So we have a very naturally beautiful location here. And that's very key as we go through this and see how the urban design initially built upon the location. Whoop. So next. Okay, there we go. So we call El Paso sometimes the center of North America. And as you can see, El Paso is right in the middle here. And it's the only east-west year-round snow-free open pass. The Pass of the North means a box canyon that's just west of El Paso's downtown, but it also means anywhere you can get through the mountains, and there's several gaps in the mountain, which I'll get to. This is a picture, an image of El Paso in 1940, and as you can see, the downtown is built up. There's a railroad here, but other than that, it's your classic hierarchy of scale. You have the taller buildings downtown, you have smaller apartment buildings extending outward from downtown, and then you have neighborhoods with a lot of greenery because this was the river valley coming down from the mountain. This is a map showing what's left of these huge river valleys that we have that really stretch all the way from Albuquerque down a little bit past El Paso. So this is the South Valley here in El Paso. And you can see from the Google map how much green there still is. But as you enter the city, it becomes all gray. So if you could imagine this green just extending all the way through to the gap here, this right around here is an escarpment that defines the river valley. So the river valley is quite large. And again, it comes all the way to this point right here. That's my neighborhood, the center of North America. There's my neighborhood again. And then as we go up north, there's the river valley again, the North River Valley. And again, you can see there's some escarpment there and escarpment here, and everything within that is the river valley. This is what downtown looks like now. The river comes down here, squeezes through a little box canyon, maybe a quarter-mile wide and half-mile long. And all of this area here was all broad. It would opened up into, again, the river valley. There's a little bit left here, the Chamizal, which was built on an island. There's a Chamizal on the US side too, and this was a result of a treaty between the US and Mexico. And just to show you how big the river valley was and how wild it was. Again, the urban form in 1940 and the urban form now. And you can see the highway here has come through and dominated much of the landscape. So I'm talking about Downtown 10, which is a project that started with something called Reimagine I-10. And as you can imagine, the reimagining was really just how do we add lanes and how do we put frontage roads where there are none. So downtown El Paso, central and downtown El Paso, for about, I want to say 2-3 miles, doesn't have frontage roads, or especially on the north side of the highway. Their plan, their proposal is to add lanes to the highway, to build frontage roads that would create new on and off ramps. And I put here eliminate bridges and north-south connectivity because when you get to the downtown portion, they would take away much of the access, much of the original street grid that someone in their wisdom left when they put the highway through. It would cost about $1 billion. So, you know, we're not looking at the scale of the Houston proposals or the Austin proposals, but it's a sizable investment. And it would be 3 to 5 years of construction, which would shut down the interstate at times. The rationale, as you all know, the pavement conditions, the bridge heights, I heard somebody mention that earlier, future local traffic, again, the projection issues, trade-related traffic, that's a big piece of this because we're on an international border, and then incident management. They insist that we need frontage roads downtown in order to divert traffic when there's an accident on the freeway. Context of downtown, the river and the mountains, as I said, define it, but there's heavy infrastructure in the heart of our city. So I name all these neighborhoods. This was a presentation that I also did locally here. So these are all neighborhoods downtown. They're all low-income neighborhoods. They're 99% Mexican American, and that's where the community decided to put its heavy infrastructure. Again, back to this map of the center of El Paso, you can see here's I-10 going through downtown. There's a spaghetti bowl over here. There's another interchange over here. There's an international port of entry. There's a highway that goes along the southern edge and goes over this neighborhood called Chihuahuita. There's a big interchange here. All of these interchanges broke up neighborhoods. They split communities from where people live to where they go to school. There's very few ways to cross on bike or foot through these areas here. So the center of El Paso, which once was this verdant river valley, has been turned into a concrete landscape with the primary purpose being transportation. So all of these neighborhoods here have been imposed upon. My neighborhood, one of the first suburbs of the city, is on a hill overlooking a little bit of this. It's not nearly as bad for us as it is for these other places. The impacts, it takes property. The property that it would take is east of downtown along this edge here and through this area here. It puts high-speed traffic closer to homes, adding pollution, noise, and vibrations to low-income and historic neighborhoods, and it creates vast expanses of concrete on either side of downtown with more visible ramps. This is their proposal here, this big, giant swath of concrete. And there currently are bridges here, 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 and here. These are not bridges. These are for a trolley that would run, that is running, but it's closed down now for lack of ridership. And the crossings would be funneled to these large areas here. So we're losing the grid that exists. This is a conceptual rendering that shows all this property here being taken. This is Sunset Heights, my neighborhood. There's a small bridge here that connects the neighborhood that would be taken. And you can see what they do is they try to eliminate conflicts and turns. So they're trying to funnel everything. They're trying to turn this downtown trench section here into just a big giant funnel for traffic, for high-speed traffic. They also bring up the possibility of a deck park for which TxDOT would pay for the piers, but the local community would have to pay for the cap and the amenities on top. The alternatives, there is a proposed expressway for which the environmental is done. The schematics are done, I believe, so it's almost ready to let. But because of the politics of what's happening in El Paso, some of the developers and other folks want the downtown expansion regardless of its impact. And they're concerned we won't get two projects out of TxDOT. So the Northeast Borderland Expressway, which really should be the priority to get trucks routed around the city, is being called priority 1A. So downtown is priority 1 and Northeast Borderland Expressway is priority 1A. This shows how you could go around El Paso. And this area here is the proposed Northeast Borderland Expressway. And it would come off of a loop, go through mostly desert, attached to a New Mexico existing highway and go through a gap called the Anthony Gap, which is part of the Pass of the North. And as you can see, all of our truck routes can go from, this is the Bridge of the Americas. Trucks come here, they could go straight up there and around. So this is a great option to get trucks out of the center of the city or much of the freight traffic. This is the process, which you all are very familiar with. These are the players that are involved. And as you can see, and as you all have experienced, it's very, very complex. But in terms of who's really, really driving this, it's a very few. There's a greater chamber in the downtown developers. There's TxDOT, and there is the MPO. And those are really the three major players, despite many, many, many folks here. And I think that's really important because the question is this the best we can do? And clearly the answer is no, it's not, especially when you have three major players among all of these people here who are affected and our stakeholders really driving the decisions. And I think the key to me is this is really an urban planning project. It's not just a transportation project, but it's being created in a silo with very little input. By the time they get to opening up scenarios and taking public input, they've pretty much already decided what they want to do. So that's the presentation, and I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cito. Next, we have Haven. The screen is yours.
Okay, everybody see that all right?
Yes,
If
I
it's
think
full screen?
now it is.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So I'm gonna start with an apology. Right next door to us, they have torn down the 1,500 square foot house and are building a 5-bedroom, 5.5 bath house. So we all get to listen to the grading machine that showed up about 15 minutes ago. And I apologize for that. It's really bad timing, but it will be an auditory reminder to everyone of the incredible housing demand that's going on in this city right now. So I'm going to talk about I-35 in Austin and what we're doing through Reconnect. Part of the point of this panel was to get,
Hayden? I'm so sorry to disturb you, but do you want to put your slides on the presentation mode?
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Can you go to the view?
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, perfect.
So
Yeah,
sorry.
perfect.
Okay, so sorry. I thought I had done that. So we wanted to take a look at these projects that are happening all across Texas because our cities are in very similar situations. TxDOT's proposals are very similar across Texas. And while each city is different, a lot of the issues are very much the same. And we really wanted to highlight that. And while we're fighting these battles kind of separately in different cities, we're talking about ways that we can collaborate more. So our grassroots team in Austin has been working on I-35 for about 8 years now. And I wanted to start kind of like Cito from the beginning. This is our original grid from the 1800s. On the right, you'll see East Avenue, which was the original eastern border of the grid. These are small walkable blocks that distribute traffic and make downtown lovely and walkable. And this is what East Avenue used to look like. This is looking south on the right. That one tall building you see is the original Brackenridge Hospital. And then in the background, further to the right, you see the original downtown or the downtown from the 1950s. And I want to point out that on the left is East Avenue. East Avenue, well, I mean, is East Austin. The East Austin neighborhood in the 1928 plan from Austin, which was our zoning ordinance, forced people who were African American who were living all over the city into this neighborhood in East Austin. It basically said you don't get city services unless you go live in this neighborhood. So then this neighborhood was redlined, like most cities in the country, which doesn't make it right, but it does mean that that's where most highways were put. You can see here that when I-35 was put through, this red line, no land really was taken from the downtown side to the west, and all the land was taken out of the East Avenue, East Austin neighborhood. Sorry about that. And this is what it looks like today. This is I-35. Yesterday, the Texas Transportation Institute released their list of the most congested highways in Texas. This portion of I-35 and 610 in Houston always compete for that top spot. It's now transferred back to I-35. And my point here is very much like Jay's. You know, that report talks all about the cost of congestion and all the hours that are lost when people sitting in traffic on this highway. And they never talk about the extreme cost in human lives and the injuries that happen on this highway. Every year, about 25% of our fatalities in the entire city of Austin happen in this single corridor, and TxDOT really does nothing about it. So TxDOT plans to completely rebuild that portion. The greater project is an $8 billion project. This central portion from 290 to the north to Highway 71 in the south is $4.9 billion. And we've been saying for a long time, and others have joined that chorus, that, you know, we are rethinking these highways all across the country and really all across the world. These are just some of the examples within the United States. Most of our highways in this country were built in the 50s and 60s. Most are crumbling, most have structural problems and need to be rebuilt. And we really have the opportunity to rethink how we rebuild those and what we do with that land. So really, we think the surface should be an urban boulevard. About 85% of the traffic, according to TxDOT, is local, and a boulevard with all the east-west streets connected is a really great way to handle all of that. And then the boulevard could obviously be multimodal. A highway is typically single modal, you know, restricted access that can go below grade. As we show here in our rendering, put the highway lanes below grade, cap them, cover them up, and allow a boulevard to exist at the surface. And then I want to point out, because people don't always realize, those buildings that you see are sitting on the frontage roads. That's tax base. Right now, those frontage roads don't pay any taxes to the city of Austin or the county or the state or anybody else. And that land is valuable real estate in downtown Austin and could become a revenue source. We calculated that downtown there are about 30 acres of land, and we calculated at a modest density of about 50 dwelling units per acre. That's about $3 billion in value that could be paying taxes, and that's just downtown. Recently, just a couple of weeks ago, TxDOT released their schematic, well, their renderings, their cross sections, I guess I should say. They're kind of cartoony. They don't even have a scale on them, but we can calculate the number of lanes, which is 20, as Jay pointed out. The cross section above is for the upper decks, which is the 2 miles where it slices through the University of Texas and then neighborhoods to the north. And the cross section at the bottom is one of their proposed alternatives for downtown. This is what that looks like in downtown Austin. It would be a huge canyon with massive frontage roads and a similar design to what Sito was showing with all those turnaround bridges, and really do nothing to reconnect the city. And of course, the wider this gets, 8 years ago when we started this process, they were saying they wanted to add 1 lane in each direction, and now we're up to 20 lanes 8 years later. The level of traffic has not changed, but the number of lanes have, and the wider this gets, the harder and more expensive it is to cap it, and the less connected the city would be. So we always use this as a reminder. This is the Katy Freeway in Houston. At its widest, it's 26 lanes. TxDOT spent a couple $1 billion, almost $3 billion, to widen this highway, and congestion is worse than ever. So I would point out that this is not an anomaly. Transportation Alternatives released a report called the Congestion Con, where they looked at 100 cities in the United States over 24 years, and they found in every single case, including where cities actually lost population, where they added highway lanes, the congestion actually got worse. Classic induced demand, I think we all know that, but unfortunately, you know, even though we like to say, and TxDOT will say it too, you can't build your way out of congestion, they're continuing to try to build their way out of congestion in most of our Texas cities. So I also want to point out that You know, downtown, I talked about those 30 acres, but we're also talking about lowering the highway now through the University of Texas, where it splits campus, and through the neighborhoods to our north up to Airport Boulevard. And that's 136 acres of land. So one of those precedents I showed was the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, which is 5 acres. It's had an enormous economic impact. And an impact on the quality of life in downtown Dallas. And that's 5 acres. So we really have an incredible once in a lifetime opportunity with 136 acres, and we need to be thinking about what we're going to do with that. And I'll just point out that highways take up a huge amount of land. This is Orvieto in Barcelona, and they show what at the same scale as the highway interchange. They depress property values. Highways are not someplace you want to be, and property values are often low next to highways, and you get parking garages and surface parking lots because of that. This is a great opportunity to reconnect our grid in all those east-west streets. And we say, you know, it could be easy like Photoshop. You know, you take the barrier that exists today on the left, put it below ground, cover it up, and on the right, you can build affordable housing, market rate housing, shops, basically rebuild the city at the surface. We also talk about the opportunity. This is a straight line, you know, level corridor through all our regional counties. And we should have regional rail in the lower portion with an easy transfer to local rail and buses at the surface. And then there's Waller Creek, which is right next door to the left. This is going to be a world-class linear park that's already beginning to emerge, and it's as close as half a block away from this corridor. So you could live on this corridor with an address on the boulevard and walk half a block and get to this lovely, lush creek hike and bike trail that connects to a series of parks downtown at Lady Bird Lake and the University of Texas to the north. So I'll just leave you with really a call to action. As Jay pointed out, TxDOT is currently doing an open house on this project. They are taking feedback. I would encourage you to go to our Reconnect Austin website. We have draft scoping recommendations there. Scoping is really, really important to this project. It's our opportunity to tell TxDOT what we're concerned about and what we would like to see. If they don't hear from the community what the community wants, they will only be focused on throughput and moving traffic. And there are a lot more issues in this corridor that need to be addressed. So I also asked Priya to put a link to an Action Network letter. If you don't have the time to go through and decide how to contact TxDOT and what you want to say, we have a super easy letter at Action Network, and that letter is editable. It'll take you about 30 seconds to follow the link and send that letter in, because volume does matter in these projects, and we do need to be telling TxDOT that we want to be considering all those things they're not considering, you know, air pollution, climate change, noise, affordable housing, tax base, return on investment, traffic fatalities, quality of life, future land uses. I mean, you name it, it needs to be addressed. So I will stop sharing and hand it back over to Veronica. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Haven. I appreciate all of your energy that you put into all of these projects in our community. And next and final presenter, we have Christoph. And thank you, everybody. I think everyone needs to catch a breath. I think we're coming to the final stretch, and we're going to have a brief Q&A at the end. We may extend a little bit over time, but I hope you stick around. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Christoph Spieler, and I'm here to talk about what's going on in Houston. So our massive freeway project is what TxDOT calls the North Houston Highway Improvement Project. Perhaps we should put improvement in quotes here. It's been in planning stages since about 2003, $7 billion plus in cost, more than 24 miles of highway covering sections of 3 different interstates, all of the interstates around downtown Houston, and then extending north to Greens Point. This is an enormously complex project, including rerouting the freeways around downtown Houston. And for many years of the planning process, I think the complexity of the project made it hard for people to understand. And the changes around downtown Houston, frankly, captured much of the attention. There was a lot of talk about Lid Park potentials and not nearly as much talk about what was happening to the neighborhoods outside of downtown. But as the process continued and after the draft environmental impact statement, you saw the neighborhoods around the project get increasingly organized and saying what we see here is not acceptable to us. And based on that, the mayor of the city of Houston, Sylvester Turner, got increasingly concerned about the project that was in front of him. And in 2019, when the Transportation Policy Council, which is our metropolitan planning organization, had a vote on funding for this project, the mayor sent a letter saying it is a potentially transformative project, but it is TxDOT's responsibility to design a project with positive impacts for the community, the city of Houston, and the greater region. And we will, without hesitation, not support this project if those items are not accomplished. But how do you get to that? What role can the city play in getting to a solution that actually works for the neighborhoods along the way? And this is what we did. And it is a very odd configuration. The Houston Endowment, a private philanthropy providing funding to the Houston Parks Board to fund a technical team consisting of Hewitt Zollers, my firm, and the Community Design Resource Center at the University of Houston to work with the City of Houston Planning Department and a facilitation group consisting of neighborhood leaders, advocates, other agencies to make requests to the Texas Department of Transportation. So what we did is we set up a parallel public process about this project. Facilitation group formed in April 2019. We got on board with the technical team in July. And then we held our first round of community workshops in August. The first thing we felt we had to do was actually explain this project to people. We did a lot of work in diagramming and helping people understand what was actually proposed. And then we had a series of meetings where we listened, where we let community members gather around tables and we asked them, what are your concerns about this project? What opportunities do you see in this project? How would you like to see your neighborhoods improved? And one of the feedback we got here is people were telling us, this is the first time in this entire process we felt that somebody was actually listening to us. And based on everything we heard here, we brought our team of engineers and planners and architects together to actually develop alternatives. We developed almost 40 different alternatives for different parts of the project, and we assembled them, we explained them so that we could go back to the public with a second round of meetings and actually give the public choices. We actually got some real pushback from people saying this is way too complicated, and our answer was, no, residents actually understand their neighborhoods. The public is actually intelligent. And if we give them good choices, we will get meaningful responses. And we absolutely did. So those 3 workshops plus a virtual workshop online led us to having a good feeling of what the community preferences for these options were. But as we weighed through those preferences, we had set out to reduce the negative impacts and increase the benefits of this project. And we found ways to do that. We said you can design the frontage roads to work like city streets and be an integral part of the neighborhood rather than be built like highways. We said you can take those managed lanes and make them transit-only lanes and then add stops along the way so that the neighborhoods actually get transit benefits from this project. We said you can build greenways along the bayous and take this chance to open up the bayou crossing and enable greenways that wouldn't be possible otherwise. But when we looked at all of these added up together, we concluded that we could not do that simply by refining the project. Segments 1 and 2 in particular, north of downtown, have huge disproportionate impacts, which was actually something the draft environmental impact statement outright stated. And the reason for that is the increase in footprint. Typically 50% increase in footprint, 150 feet wider, accomplished by tearing down homes and businesses. And when we looked at the screening process for how this project happened in the first round of screening, before even considering displacement impacts, before even considering right-of-way impacts. TxDOT eliminated all the alternatives that did not add lanes to the highway. And in fact, the only place where the initial screening considered right-of-way impacts was the richest and whitest neighborhoods in segments 1 and 2. This highways were originally built not just before modern environmental legislation, but before the Voting Rights Act. These are neighborhoods which literally did not have a voice as to whether the highway would be built through their neighborhoods. And here we're looking at a project that makes those impacts that they've lived with for decades even worse. Leads to basic questions like, is it acceptable to have negative impacts on low-income minority communities so that others can have a better commute? Should this project mitigate its own impacts or also mitigate the impacts of the original highway? So what we did is we worked with the city and everything we had heard to say, here are what the goals for this project should be. And we looked at our own options for what we might be able to do to meet those goals. Fundamentally, these discussions are trade-offs. And we realize that the key trade-offs here are displacements and neighborhood impacts, the capacity added to the highway, and design standards. And I don't say safety here because TxDOT really doesn't evaluate safety. TxDOT designs for design standards and assumes that if it meets design standards, it's safe, which, as Jay talked about earlier, I don't think we can assume that at all. But there are really direct impacts here. If you look at a typical freeway section, bringing it up to TxDOT design standards adds 86 feet, adding more lanes adds 60 feet. That's where the space came from. But in looking at this project, we concluded that there's an alternate vision that can increase capacity, increase safety, and have minimal displacement. Namely, we add capacity by adding transit lanes, two-way transit lanes that can carry a whole lot more people than single occupant vehicle lanes can. And we look at those design standards. We ask what's necessary. Do the shoulders really need to be 12 foot wide or can those be 10 foot wide? So we think there's an alternate way to do this project north of downtown that generally does not require any right-of-way, that does not add any single occupant vehicle capacity, but actually increases the people carrying capacity of this highway considerably. And this is an alternative TxDOT really did not evaluate. So in May, the mayor of Houston sent a letter to TxDOT saying, here are the changes we would like to see on this project. And for segments 1 and 2 of this project, we would like you to consider a whole new alternative. And remarkably, Harris County then chimed in, and Harris County said, we agree with the mayor's letter, and passed a commissioner's court resolution endorsing the same asks. That then led to a vote at HDAC to set up a working group under a memorandum of understanding to oversee a process for evaluating additional alternatives. Now, I will say at this point, I'm not sitting here and saying we've achieved something here, because we've only achieved something here if TxDOT genuinely evaluates those alternatives, and the political pressure will need to continue to make that process happen. But fundamentally, you have the two major jurisdictions here looking at this project and saying, there's a better way to do this highway that actually meets TxDOT's stated goals with much less impacts to neighborhoods. And we got there by really involving the communities in the discussion. So my conclusion here is local jurisdictions really need to take an active role in these projects and not just let TxDOT do all the thinking and planning. And that if we do genuine, real community outreach, we can get to much better solutions. And with that, I'm looking forward to the questions.
Well, thank you, Christoph. If everybody could turn on their cameras now, please. And we're going to catch our breath. Thank you, because this was a marathon. Thank you, everybody. You guys knocked it out of the park. I mean, what an amazing energy and wisdom you have shared with all of us today. I'm very inspired, and we've been able to answer a lot of the questions simultaneously from each of you. So what I like to do next, I mean, we have another 10 minutes. We're running a little bit out of time, so we're going to use the next 10 minutes to answer a couple of questions. And so please continue to submit questions as we go. But each of these visionary projects is unique in its approach, but they all are very similar in their values, prioritizing human life and quality of life in the heart of our cities. And this is over fast-moving cars and vehicles. What are some actionable recommendations that we need to do in order to convince our legislators to heal or return the heart of our cities back to its citizens, to invest in multimodal solutions and mass transit within the existing boundaries of the highway right-of-way? Any of you want to take on that question?
Can I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
And one of the things is just to loop all of this together is the guy that's not from Texas. And I'm probably the most burnt out of everybody here on dealing with these processes. One of the things I like to stitch together is that there's a lesson from everybody here about the steps that are necessary. The marathon approach that Hayden's taking, and the kind of like just keep on running it into the wall approach that Patrick's taking, but also the beauty of Patrick's graphics, the putting the information out so that regular people can understand it. Cito, you're just getting into this as a process, but all of these things are transferable. We're all going through these same processes together. And Christoph, basically just explained the reason why you need to have political support and political power is that it's given to us. So Jay and Christoph are going through this with local leadership and getting that leadership support. My local leadership vaporized. They collapsed like a house of cards because, quite honestly, they were threatened by the local DOT director, who threatened to take away funding in our region, which was completely asinine and unbelievable. But this is the game. This is the game that we're up against. This isn't about just making transit and nice sidewalks and trees. This is big money to people, and they will fight at a big level. So we have to bring that same game, and it's just and go into it with our eyes wide open. We're activists. We're people that stepped into the CNU and said we are going to actively get involved in our community and do stuff, and we know what's right because we have the history of cities and civilization behind us. And we're up against a modern machine that's essentially capitalized to do this stuff. So we can't be naive about it. We have to go into it, and I think that we all have this kind of collective shared experience, and this is what makes us all part of this presentation and part of this group, is that we want to share this knowledge. So I just wanted to, this has been a great panel to be part of, and it really, I'm humbled by everything that everybody's doing down there, and I wish I had that here in my town.
Yeah, so thank you, Joe, because I think, we're here for the long haul. We don't want to get burned out, and we want to be able to have a cohesive message of unification of how we elevate these ideas forward, make sure they're implementable. We have a question that just came in from the Q&A, and it's from an anonymous attendee. It says, it seems like all our communities and many others not mentioned are fighting the same thing. Is there any way we can work together to reach our collective goals? Anybody want to take that answer, that question?
Well, I was just typing to respond to that one, that we are, Fireman City is gathering a group of people who are working on these kind of projects and essentially trying to create a sort of support group for people who are struggling to fight or to improve major TxDOT projects. But it's sort of slow going, and we don't have any funding for that project. So it's just at the pace that we can put it together. And there is already a statewide group focused specifically on transit and transit funding called Texas Friends of Transit that I think really can change the conversation. And so I think the point is all of us are talking more now than we ever have, and more of that across the whole state will be more and more beneficial. So.
Thank you, Jay. Any final thoughts from one of our panels? I have a couple more questions, but I just want to know that if y'all are drinking out of a fire hose.
I mean, I would throw in to add to Jay, this is both an issue of local decisions and statewide policy. I mean, there's a reason these projects we're seeing look so similar, and that has to do with how TxDOT thinks about design. It has to do with what the legislature has instructed TxDOT to do. It has to do with how statewide funding is prioritized around this idea of the most congested corridors. So I think making freeways in Texas more respectful of the cities and the neighborhoods around them is going to take both local work and statewide work.
And if I could add to that, I think if you can get an audience with every elected official that you can at every level imaginable so that they understand that the models are fundamentally broken and don't value whatever their particular values might be, particularly in the state of Texas, that it's not a good use of public dollars because it doesn't yield any kind of actual public benefit, that will resonate eventually.
In addition to the leadership, I would add, do a presentation at the Rotary Club, or some church group. If I like to say, if my mom doesn't understand what I'm doing, then I'm failing to communicate. So this shouldn't be about our, wonking out on professional stuff or nerdy trip counts and things like that. Is how does the regular person who's just too busy to pay attention understand the scale and enormity of these impacts? And visualizing them, showing the drawings, and then showing the numbers of the financial consequences really wakes people up.
I was going to say what Joe just said. It's a campaign. And so in a campaign, you just have to reach people through any venue you can, whether it's Facebook pages, social media, but the face-to-face civic groups, neighborhood associations, doing that presentation. And I tend to get in my head a little bit and focus on all the planning concepts and the quality of life, blah, blah, blah. But really people care about their taxes, their tax dollars, and eminent domain really is a trigger as well.
Yeah, and I'd like to, in the last 2 minutes that we have left, we have received a question from Sinclair Black. And he says, what would be the impact on this common problem if the Biden administration appointed people at the federal level who put on a policy that no highway project would receive federal funding unless and until the previously voted urban design plan was in place? So more than a question, it's a statement that anybody would like to augment.
Awesome.
Yeah,
It would be awesome, right?
I'll say in a very simple way, highway agencies are not held to the same standards in terms of their analyses processes and their environmental impact processes as transit agencies are. If the feds simply took NEPA more seriously and actually held highway agencies to the simple requirements of the law, we would end up with very different projects.
And I've advocated at the CNU national level for years that this was federal money that made a lot of this happen, even though it was routed largely by local officials. It's going to take federal programs and federal money to undo a lot of it because it's just too difficult for advocates at a local level to be fighting all of them.
And there is an unfortunate term inside the practice of law called writ of mandamus, which is basically suing your government to get it to follow its own rules. And there's a reason why we're given that authority as Americans. Is like our government shouldn't be running amok all over us, and they do, And so the consequences of it, first you have to understand the laws and what NEPA has given us, and then we have to hold our government accountable. But the big hammer that we have is a lawsuit. So work with attorneys in your area. I've recommended to Hayden to get involved with the University of Texas School of Law and talk to an attorney that's a NEPA specialist and have them advise you as part of your team, or whatever local college or institution is in your area, because we're not attorneys. So we have to understand like where our rules are and get involved in those timelines and in the processes and hold them accountable. But that law was created to give us power.
Well, and I think in Central Texas, I'm sorry to interrupt, we have 1 more minute to go, but I just wanted to mention real quick that, in Central Texas, we just passed at this historic election, a gigantic bond for mass transit. I mean, this is Project Connect. We have the work laid out ahead of us. It's visionary. I think it's something that we can all embrace. And I think we need to give it a chance before we continue to widen highways. Let's give transit a chance to succeed. So this is, to me, I think, a great opportunity for our community, and they have voted yes, that they want different options of mobility. And any final thoughts from any of you? And thank you for the energy. And with this, I think we need to close it up because we have run out of time. We're exactly at 10 minutes and 10:30, and we need to prepare for the next panel. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
So I appreciate everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.